good afternoon. I'm Keval Datani.
I'm Abdi Boué.
I'm Natasha Riga-Jones.
And welcome to Warwick Congress Weekly. It's week 2 and the pressure is certainly turning up as exam season is well and truly underway for the most of us. Fortunately, whether it's a revision break from revision or simply needing something to listen to while you write your notes, we'll be keeping you up to date with the latest news that matters. And today we've got a lot on the card.
Today we'll be discussing
Russian bots' involvement in Labour's 2017 election campaign,
Amber Rudd's resignation and the appointment of Sajid Javid,
the denuclearisation agreement between North and South Korea.
We've got news on Xi Jinping's meeting with the Prime Minister of India, Mr. Modi, and we've got financial news of the week as well.
We're also covering the migrant caravan crisis at the border with America.
And we also have an update on the US trade war with what looks like the world now.
And as always, I'll be giving you a Brexit update.
But first, we're going to explain a bit about Warwick Congress, who we are, what we do, and how we do it.
Warwick Congress is one of the fastest growing student-run initiatives in the UK, aiming to unite the disciplines of finance, economics, politics and law into a single platform. To stay up to date with everything we do, sign up for free membership on our website at www.warwickcongress.com.
Our hope is that Warwick Congress Weekly can inform our listeners, and if you have any questions, queries or opinions, please message in and let us know. You can do so by going to www.radio.warwick.ac.uk and pressing the message tab on the top right corner. And you can also tweet us at raw1251 AM. So our first story of the week heads to Russia and concerns Twitter and bots.
Yeah, so the Sunday Times has announced that Russian bots attempted to influence the result of the general election by promoting Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn across social media sites. And the Sunday Times discovered that 6,500 Russian Twitter accounts rallied behind Labour in the weeks before last year's election, helping supportive messages to reach millions of voters whilst undermining the Conservatives. And these bots are said to have masqueraded under British female names, but were in fact mass-produced to bombard the public with orchestrated political messages, with 9 out of 10 messages about the Labour Party supporting its campaign, and with around 80% of the automated accounts having been created in the weeks leading up to polling day on the 8th of June, being particularly active at key points in the campaign. And whilst the vast majority of these accounts have now been suspended or removed by Twitter, academics warn that this discovery might only be the tip of the iceberg, which is quite scary.
And this is obviously quite a serious allegation from the Sunday Times. So how has Labour responded to, I guess, the controversy that this has caused?
Well, this report has come at a time when Corbyn has kind of been continually attacked over his unwillingness to criticise Russia over the Salisbury nerve agent attack and the use of chemical weapons in Syria. And Labour, unsurprisingly, has dismissed the report and said it was not aware of receiving any support from automated bots during the campaign, with a spokesman for the party saying that it categorically did not pay for any automated bots and was not aware of any of its supporters doing so either. And with the spokesman highlighting the peculiarity of this allegation, given that Russia actually appeared to favour the Conservatives during the general election, not Labour, given that the Russian embassy in London promoted their ideological convergence, and Theresa May's strong and stable slogan on Twitter, on top of the numerous donations that the Conservative Party has received from Russian oligarchs.
So who's actually behind the bots then?
Well, helpfully, researchers don't really have any idea who's behind the bots, and have warned that it's basically impossible to prove who was behind them, their motives or what impact they've had on the outcome of the election. With the Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell having dismissed the accusation that Russia tried to swing the election in Corbyn's favour as a classic Sunday Times smear campaign against Labour, likening the report to infamous smears that the newspaper published against Labour leader Neil Kinnock before the 1992 general election. And McDonnell went on to state, if there's an issue here about anything with Russian influence in our society, it's about Russian oligarchs funding the Tory party. Let's have an inquiry into that. So he's not really having any of that. And whilst the source of these Twitter bots is yet to be known, Twitter has stated that it's continuing to improve its security systems and educate the public, with a spokesman stating, our work to fight both malicious bots and misinformation goes beyond any one specific election, event or time period. This is a huge story, and it's very interesting to see how it develops and whether we'll get kind of like a similar investigation that America's currently having into Russian influence in their election with Robert Mueller.
Meanwhile, it's also been quite busy on the government side of the benches in the House of Commons, with Amber Rudd resigning this week and Sajid Javid being appointed the Home Secretary.
Yes, indeed. Sajid Javid has promised to do whatever it takes, really, to put the problems right faced by Windrush generation after he succeeded Amber Rudd, as you said, as Home Secretary. Mr. Javid is a former investment banker, an MP for Bromsgrove, and he's been an MP since 2010, and he's been Community Secretary now for about 18 months, and he's sort of seen as a rising star within the Tory party. The 48-year-old, who was previously served as Business and Culture Secretary, has led the government's response to last year's Grenfell Tower fire disaster as well.
So why has it happened now specifically?
Well, Miss Rudd's departure came after she faced mounting criticism over her handling of the Windrush scandal, and also her handling of what is seen as a quite hostile immigration policy. Mr. Javid was appointed after Miss Rudd quit on Sunday evening, saying she inadvertently misled MPs over immigration removal targets. Although Miss Rudd told MPs last week and the Home Office that they didn't have targets for removing illegal immigrants on Sunday, The Guardian did publish a letter in which Miss Rudd set out her ambitious but deliverable aim to deport 10% more illegal immigrants over the next few years to Theresa May. This whole Windrush scandal has sort of been in the limelight recently, and to give you a bit of context around it, the Windrush generation settled legally in post-war Britain and automatically got the right to remain in the UK, but the UK government did not keep a record of everyone in that position. Numerous changes to the immigration laws over the years, in particular to change made in 2012, which required documentation to work, rent and access benefits, including healthcare, has made securing and sort of accessing information on people's immigration status vital for migrants. The decision to destroy the landing cards therefore made it difficult for the Windrush immigrants to prove they had the right to stay in the country. Consequently, some people who did not have the paperwork to prove they're in the UK legally have been detained, lost their jobs, and even have been denied access to medical care.
So, given this is, I guess, priority number one for the Conservative government, what has been Mr. Javid's initial response to the scandal now that he's the new Home Secretary?
Well, there's been a call to abandon the hostile environment policy on illegal immigration, which Miss Rudd and Mrs May continue to defend, although Mr Javid in particular told MPs he preferred the phrase compliant environment, which is quite interesting. He told MPs Windrush cases were being investigated as a matter of urgency, so he's carrying on the line that Amber Rudd sort of said immediately after the scandal as well, with more than 100 protests so far and 500 appointments scheduled. In response, the Labour Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott has been quite vocal on this, said the Windrush generation was my parents' generation. I believe and most British people believe that they have been treated appallingly. And dealing with the Windrush crisis, as well as the underlying problems around immigration, will probably be high on Mr Javid's agenda. However, tackling rising knife crime, fighting to justify police cuts, and even handling the ongoing terrorism threat are all key issues that he has to face going forward. All in all then, the Prime Minister still has serious questions to answer about how this scandal was allowed to happen in the first place, and whether she knew Amber Rudd was intentionally misleading Parliament and the public last week.
And I guess given that the evidence that The Guardian pointed out was a letter to Prime Minister Theresa May, that probably doesn't look terribly good for her. I guess onto something a bit more positive. There has been some form of an agreement, you could say, whether it's date on an agreement, we're yet to see, but between North and South Korea. Yeah,
so the leaders of North and South Korea have signed a joint declaration on Friday, agreeing to work for the complete denuclearisation of the Korean peninsula. And North and South Korea will begin talks aimed at signing a peace treaty to formally end the Korean War 65 years after hostilities ceased. And speaking at a banquet after Friday's talks, Kim Jong-un praised the progress made so far, saying, "We bade farewell to the frozen relationship between North and South Korea, which was a nightmare, and we continue the beginning of a warm spring to the world," which is quite nice.
So what's actually in the agreement?
So the statement didn't provide any new kind of specific measures as to how to achieve the objective of denuclearisation. And analysts remain sceptical about the North's apparent enthusiasm for engagement, as the agreement didn't explicitly refer to North Korea halting its nuclear activities, but instead lists the aim of a nuclear-free Korean peninsula. So there's still some sort of atmosphere about there and whether they're actually going to go through with it. However, Kim said that the two leaders had agreed to work together to prevent a repeat of the region's unfortunate history in which progress had fizzled out, with Kim stating, "There may be backlash, hardship and frustration, but victory cannot be achieved without pain." And other key points in the joint statement included an end to hostile activities between the two nations, ceasing propaganda broadcasts to change the demilitarised zones that divide the country into a peace zone, and pushing for four-way talks involving the US and China. And Kim joked during the summit that he would no longer interrupt Moon Jae-in's sleep with early morning missile tests.
An interesting joke to make there. So I guess given President Trump's quite vocal on everything, what's the US response been to this?
Yeah, so looking at Trump's tweets, it seems that he is keen on a peace treaty, but he's vowed that he would not be played by the North Korean leader, with Kim being due to meet Trump in the coming weeks, and with Trump having said, "We will come up with a solution, and if we don't, we'll leave the room," which is, quite a nice way to end it, really.
And Trump-like, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, jumping slightly down the road to the two superpowers in Asia, in China and India. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi met with Chinese President Xi Jinping, or I don't know if we can call him emperor yet, given that they got rid of their term limits, which we published a piece on actually last term, so check that out on warwickcongress.com. But they met at the beginning of an informal 2-day relation-building summit in the central Chinese city of Wuhan. And the summit comes after the two countries were involved in a tense 72-day military standoff last summer over the disputed border region of the India-China-Bhutan tri-junction. Last year, India and China experienced their most serious border crisis in the last 3 decades in that incident. And China's state-controlled media was issuing near-daily threats of war as both sides built up forces on the edge of the tiny kingdom of Bhutan. Though officials from both sides have stressed that the meeting had no stated goals or set agenda, the state-owned China Daily suggested that the two leaders would focus on a number of key issues, specifically global governance and shared international challenges.
So why have the key leaders kind of decided to meet now then?
Well, it would have seemed implausible that just 8 months on, Mr. Modi and Mr. Xi would be meeting at an informal summit. But the meeting does not come out of the blue. So after the border dispute was diffused in August, they both met and broke the ice at the BRIC summit in September. And since then, high-level visits to China followed, including by India's Foreign Secretary, National Security Advisor, Foreign Minister and Defence Minister. So it's clearly an area of focus. And the meeting could be held now because India might be trying to keep tensions keep tensions in check, especially with national elections coming up in 2019. And more broadly, China's economy is 5 times bigger than India's, and its defence spending is 3 times as large. So I guess it's important to keep that relationship sweet when you have the option to. Also, having Beijing's cooperation on several issues where China's role is crucial is beneficial for India, such as putting pressure on Pakistan-based terrorist groups and securing India's admission to the Nuclear Suppliers Group, a body that controls nuclear trade. So from China's perspective, analysts say that by engaging with Mr. Modi, Mr. Xi hopes to slow India's steady drift towards America and its allies, and given that both are nuclear powers, dialogue should hopefully be expected. Meanwhile, over in the US, there's migrant updates, really.
Yeah, this happens yearly, interestingly enough, this whole caravan with the migrants travelling over to America. But it's been brought to your attention quite recently again. So like dozens of migrants have been travelling and they seek asylum in the US, but they've been stopped at the border. This particular caravan set off for the US on the 25th of March in southern Mexico, near the Guatemala border, and at one point numbered more than 1,000 people. The group were travelling by bus, train and on foot during their 2,000-mile trek to the US border, with many saying that they were fleeing persecution and violence in their home countries. It's still not immediately known whether the migrants from Central America are going to be allowed to stay or be turned back, but the group appears to be sort of staying put.
So what's been the response to this then? Because I'm sure Trump has had something to say about it.
Most certainly. President Trump has tweeted that these migrants shouldn't be allowed into the country. And also Vice President Mike Pence called the caravan a deliberate attempt to undermine the laws of this country and the sovereignty of the United States. But migrants from this caravan are at a port of entry here and asking for asylum. And under international law, the United States and other countries must consider asylum claims. And the group has been a frequent target for the US president, who has argued in his tweets that it showed the need to tighten immigration laws. He's also asked states bordering Mexico to send troops to shore up security until his proposed border wall is built. Trump has also lamented the practice of letting immigrants with pending cases leave detention in some, and vowed his administration will put an end to the policy, which he calls catch and release. Despite this, then, historically, most claimants don't make it into the country. More than 75% of the applicants from Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador between 2011 and 2016 were rejected, according to Syracuse University's Transactional Records Access Clearinghouse. Wow, that was a long name.
So why are they kind of trying to leave in the first place then?
Well, if you look at it carefully, many of the migrants are actually from Central America, namely Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. If you take Honduras, for example, it's the second poorest country in Central America, and it suffers from what people say is an extraordinarily unequal distribution of income and rampant underemployment. There's also the case of widespread gang violence, which fuels instability and suffering for a lot of their people. And criminals have extorted Hondurans into paying an arbitrary war tax for their survival. And those who can't pay, as you can imagine, are often killed. One of the migrant caravan members, go by the name of Karen Gallo, she said that there are no jobs, no justice, no laws in Honduras. It's quite a damning account of the situation in the country. And also some of the migrants are transgender people who face persecution in Honduras. And Nicole Contreras said that she suffered discrimination because of her sexuality, which made her sort of be discriminated against for work. And also she was sort of suffering from abuse from her own family for being gay and a trans person.
So what happens now then with this sort of migrant caravan issue?
Well, US border officials told some 150 people, many travelling with children, that the Mexico-US border crossing near San Diego was already full. Kevin McAleenan, the Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, the CBP, a branch of Homeland Security, said that they sort of reached their capacity at the port of entry. The agency lacked, in his words, sufficient space and resources to process persons travelling without appropriate entry documentation. Also, the number of inadmissible individuals who are able to be processed varies based on the complexity of cases, resources available, medical needs, translation requirements, and sort of the space they have in the detention centre. So sort of in the US words, they're not really violating international law by refusing access or entry for asylum seekers. They simply lack the capacity to deal with the problem. And although the CBP maintain this position, people aren't convinced. Wendy Young, head of Kids in Need of Defence, said, it defies the imagination that we don't have the resources to process that number of people. They're trying to send a message to the people of Central America that there's no point coming because simply we won't let you in. Laura Galt, a legal observer with Human Rights First, who is accompanied by asylum seekers, suspected that sort of border officials will keep the numbers low. And she believes that will be a very long and drawn-out process, so we probably won't be hearing the last of this. But overall, it's believed that many of the migrants will be detained and separated from relatives while their petitions are being investigated and likely to be rejected as well. So their journey is, as you can say, far from over.
On to some financial news of the week, as always, and a lot of this is actually quite hot off the press. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin is unconcerned about the bond market's ability to absorb a rising government debt after his department said it borrowed a record amount for the first quarter of 2018. And he said that, by definition, supply and demand will equate. Net borrowing totaled $488 billion, exceeding the old record of $483 billion, which was achieved in quarter one of 2010, a period when the US was struggling to pull out of the financial crisis. A US delegation led by Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin is on its way to China as we speak to discuss economic matters and the trade deficit. President Trump wrote in a tweet, very much like North Korea, this should have been fixed years ago. And ahead of the meeting, China weakened its daily yuan fixing to 6.3670 per dollar, more than expected by analysts, giving it a bargaining chip to strengthen the currency if needed. In a decision that surprised no one, the Reserve Bank of Australia kept benchmark rates at 1.5% for a 21st successive month, the longest spell of inactivity since 1990. Inflation is expected to remain muted, even as the Australian economy remains for growth to pick up to average a bit above 3% in 2018 and 2019, according to the Reserve Bank of Australia Governor Philip Lowe. As a closely watched vertical merger case wrapped up in court, Judge Richard Leon indicated that he could be considering a decision that wasn't clear approval or blocking of the widely anticipated AT&T Time Warner deal. He asked about the possibility of imposing a remedy, like saying that the $85 billion acquisition could go forward if the companies sell a particular asset, and a decision on that merger should come on June the 12th. Apple shares rose more than 3% in after-hours trading overnight as the iPhone X and services segment had their best quarter ever. The combination drove total revenue up 16% to $61.1 billion in the latest period, while profits soared 25% to $13.8 billion, its highest level for a March quarter. Apple also flexed its financial muscle with a record $100 billion stock buyback plan, so quite a good first quarter for Apple. Amid reported clashes with parent company Facebook over strategy and its approach to personal data, WhatsApp founder Jan Koum is exiting his role as Facebook's director and CEO of WhatsApp. This move follows the departure last year of fellow WhatsApp co-founder Brian Acton, who has since been publicly critical of Facebook. And Facebook bought WhatsApp for $22 billion in 2014. And in the last 24 hours, Mark Zuckerberg has announced a new dating service on Facebook, and the feature will require users to opt in, he told the F8 developer conference, and was, I'm quoting here, designed with privacy in mind in light of all the recent allegations. Match Group, which is the parent company of Tinder, OkCupid, and Match.com, took a beating on the news, plunging 22% on Tuesday, while its majority owner, Interactive Corp, lost more than 17%. And finally, Twitter has announced more than 30 new partnerships, bringing original shows from NBC Universal, Disney, and Viacom, as well as others, to its platform. Daily video views have doubled over the past year, and Twitter hopes the premium programming will attract new advisors and audiences.
Well, moving on here from financial news, we sort of have another sort of financy bit as well with the US and EU trade war, which Kev will sort of delve into for us.
Yes, so US President Donald Trump, his administration has extended negotiation on steel and aluminium tariffs for 30 days with Canada, Mexico, and the EU. And just as a quick recap, some countries were then exempted temporarily from those tariffs that he announced, which included Canada, Mexico, and the EU, which has allowed for these negotiations to occur. China was not included in the exemptions and later retaliated with its own duties on some US imports, which is a story that we brought you last week. And as I just said, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin is on his way to China to negotiate, hopefully, a settlement to that aspect of this trade war. President Trump extending these negotiations with Canada, Mexico, and the EU are the latest element in what is turning more really into a trade saga that affects the whole world than a trade war itself.
So, Kevin, how has the EU responded to this situation?
Well, the EU said that delaying the decision prolongs market uncertainty, which was already having an effect on businesses both in the EU and in the USA. And it was open to discussions, it said, but warned, as a long-standing partner and friend of the US, we will not negotiate under threat. And the EU reacted to these negotiations, well, to the 30-day extension, by insisting that it should be fully and permanently exempted from these measures as they cannot be justified on the grounds of national security. And it has already threatened a series of countermeasures if that does not happen. Many analysts have seen this as simply kicking the can down the road following visits from President Macron of France and Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany last week to the White House. And this delay gives the administration more time to convince trading partners to perhaps consider quota in lieu of tariffs, a concession to which South Korea has already agreed. South Korea was given an indefinite exemption in return for 30% cut in its steel exports to the USA. The White House also has, and I'm quoting, reached agreements in principle with Argentina, Australia, and Brazil with respect to steel and aluminium, the details of which will be finalized shortly, according to the White House press office. Meanwhile, it's that time of the week. We haven't got a jingle for you yet, but it is the Brexit update.
Yeah, so in Brexit news, the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, has given Britain until June to reach an agreement with the EU over the key points of the Northern Ireland border issue, with Barnier warning that Brexit talks are at risk of collapsing if no agreement is made to prevent a hard border. And Barnier's comments come just after a lack of progress on the border issue in talks this year, with just 1 month remaining until the June meeting of the European Council. And Barnier himself has proposed a so-called self-standing backstop in order to prevent a hard border between the Republic and Northern Ireland, given that the UK's decision to leave the single market and the custom union creates a risk that such a hard border will arise. And whilst a political agreement has been reached on the need for such a self-standing backdrop system, in December, the exact technical working has not yet been reached.
So it kind of sounds like the issue's been resolved in theory.
Well, Barnier's proposal has been heavily criticised by the leader of the DUP, Arlene Foster, who has accused the chief negotiator of not understanding the unionist position on the border issue, and she stated at length, his proposals of us being in an all-island regulatory scenario with a border down the Irish Sea simply does not work. It does not work constitutionally, politically, and it certainly does not work from an economic perspective. We've tried to get him to understand the unionist position for the people of Northern Ireland, but he hasn't really responded, and I'm disappointed about that. I don't think he understands the wider unionist culture of Northern Ireland, so strong criticism there from Arlene. However, British diplomats in Brussels are confident that a solution can be quickly resolved, although there are discrepancies as to when a solution is expected to be finalised. As whilst Barnier has given a June deadline, Brexit Secretary David Davis has stated that it's more likely to be resolved in October, given that the whole Brexit withdrawal agreement, including citizens' rights, the financial settlement and the transition period of Brexit still need to be agreed upon. So it doesn't really look too likely that June deadline is going to be met.
So I guess for all the students listening, which is, I guess, pretty much our whole audience, if you were worried about your exams, essays or anything, well, our government's not going to meet their deadlines, so you definitely can meet yours.
What a line.
Yeah, exactly. Before we leave you, we're going to summarise all the stories that you've heard, as always. So Sajid Javid has been appointed Home Secretary after the resignation of Amber Rudd over the Windrush scandal. Her resignation came after it emerged that she had known about the immigration removal targets, something she had previously denied to the House of Commons. The Sunday Times has announced that Russian bots attempted to influence the result of the general election last year by promoting Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn across social media sites whilst undermining the Conservatives. However, Labour has denied any involvement, with Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell having dismissed the accusations as a classic Sunday Times smear campaign, given that Russia appeared to favour the Conservatives during the election, not Labour.
After a historic summit between North and South Korea, they agreed to work to rid the peninsula of nuclear weapons. The statement did not provide any new specific measures on how to achieve the objective of denuclearisation, but Mr. Trump is due to meet Mr. Kim in the coming weeks and has vowed he will not be played by the North Korean leader. Also, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi met with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Friday for informal talks in the Chinese city of Wuhan. The summit comes after India and China's dispute over the India-China-Bhutan region last summer. While officials say there was no agenda behind the talks, analysts believe this strategic competition for power and influence is unlikely to slow down. Hundreds of Central American migrants from a caravan denounced by Donald Trump have arrived at the US border, where they plan to try and seek asylum. Although US immigration lawyers have warned them that they could be separated from their children and spend months in detention centres, the migrants are determined to enter the US legally and apply for political asylum.
US President Donald Trump's administration has extended negotiations on steel and aluminium tariffs for 30 days with Canada, Mexico and the EU. The EU has said that delaying the decision simply prolongs market uncertainty and that it will negotiate with the USA, but has refused to do so under threat. And finally, the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, has given Britain until June to reach an agreement over the Northern Ireland border issue, with Brexit talks being likely to collapse if no agreement is made to prevent a hard border between the Republic and Northern Ireland.
Becoming a member of Warwick Congress has never been easier. With exclusive interviews, articles and careers events for our members, don't miss out on the benefits that Warwick Congress membership can provide. Sign up now at www.warwickcongress.com. We'd like to wish you all the best for any exams, essays, deadlines that you have. You've been listening to Warwick Congress Weekly. We'll be back at the same time next week.